Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're going to unpack a really powerful idea that the way we're all educated, no matter where we are in the world, carries this kind of hidden colonial legacy. And this isn't just some dusty old history lesson. It's about how we think right now, what we value, and maybe even what knowledge we've lost along the way.
So let's start with a question that this paper forces us to confront, one that's so basic we almost never ask it. What is education actually for? I mean, really, is it just about getting a job, being a good citizen, or is there something, deeper going on?
Okay, so here's the big problem the paper points out. Pretty much every school, every university, every curriculum on the entire planet is shaped by one dominant worldview. And that worldview is specifically Eurocentric. This was no accident. It's a design that has a tendency to sideline, or sometimes just completely ignore, other incredibly rich ways of understanding the world.
So what happens when one way of thinking takes over like that? Well, the author calls it a crisis of knowing. It's the situation where entire cultures start to doubt their own heritage, their own intellectual traditions. And to really get how we ended up here, we've got to go back and look at the roots of it all.
The source traces this whole issue back to a really powerful concept it calls the colonial episteme. Now, episteme sounds like a complicated academic word, right? But all it really means is the underlying system of knowledge in a society. The unspoken rules that decide what counts as true or valid in the first place.
So we've got to be clear here. This isn't about colonialism in the way you might think, with armies and flags and conquering land. No, epistemic colonialism is about conquering the mind. It's a process that systematically cripples a people's way of thinking and replaces it, which basically takes away their ability to define their own reality.
And listen, this wasn't some kind of secret plan. They said it right out loud with shocking clarity. This quote here is from a pretty infamous memo written in 1835 by a British politician, Thomas Macaulay. He was outlining the goal of education in India, and it was explicit: to create people who were, quote, Indian in blood and color, but English in tastes, in opinions, in morals, and in intellect. Wow.
So what was the result of all this? According to the paper, it was absolutely devastating. The author uses a really strong term, structural genocide, but not of people, of knowledge systems. It was the total annihilation of existing educational philosophies, traditions, and the entire way of life that was built around them.
Okay, so that's the history. But how does this old colonial baggage still show up in a classroom today? Well, the paper argues its impact is direct, and it shapes the very methods we use to teach and learn.
Think about how school often works. The teacher stands at the front of the room and basically deposits information into the students' brains, right? Well, the brilliant Brazilian educator Paulo Freire had a name for this. He called it the banking model. And it's a system where students are just treated like empty containers. It's not really designed to make you a critical thinker, it's designed to make you manageable.
And this is where things get really fascinating. The paper puts that banking model right next to a traditional Islamic approach to education, which is centered on a concept called adab. That's all about cultivating goodness and ethical character. And just look at the difference. The goal of one is a manageable citizen. The goal of the other is a good man. The student goes from being a passive bucket to an active participant in their own moral journey. It's a total flip.
So what's the long-term effect of this banking model, especially in places that were colonized? The paper calls it hermeneutical gloom. Sounds pretty grim, right? It's this deep loss of confidence where communities start to actually believe that their own traditions, their own philosophies, their own science, that they just aren't good enough to solve modern problems.
All right, so if that's the problem, how do we get out of this gloom? Well, the paper doesn't just point out what's wrong. It proposes a pretty radical solution, a way to reclaim that intellectual heritage by completely reversing our perspective.
Here's the core idea, and it's a real game changer. For centuries, the default in academia has been to study and critique Islam using a Western Euro-American lens. The paper says, what if we just flipped the script? What if we took the incredibly sophisticated tools of Islamic thought, its ethics, its metaphysics, its legal traditions, and used them to analyze and critique modernity, secularism, even colonialism itself?
And this isn't just some abstract idea. The paper lays out a concrete three-step plan. First, you have to challenge the quiet assumption that Western thought is the default or superior model. Second, you have to actually include the massive body of work from Muslim intellectual traditions in our schools. And third, you develop new ways of teaching that are actually rooted in Islamic values, like that idea of adab we just talked about.
Now, to really get this new approach, you have to understand that it's built on a totally different vision of what knowledge even is and how it all fits together. This really gets to the heart of the philosophical divide here.
Think of it like this. Our modern system tends to see knowledge as horizontal or flat. All fields are kind of equal, and we usually judge them based on how useful they are. It also creates this clean break between facts and values, between what is true and what is good. But the traditional Islamic model described here, it's vertical. It's grounded in a hierarchy of reality. And in that model, facts and values are totally connected because your ability to know reality is tied to your own ethical state.
And this slide shows you exactly how that vertical structure works. At the very top, you have metaphysics. This is the science of first principles, the ultimate why. Everything flows down from there. From metaphysics, you get theology, and from those two, you get the material sciences, the how. See, in this model, physics isn't separate from metaphysics. It's grounded in it. It's all connected.
So why does all this philosophical stuff matter? The paper makes it really clear. This is not just some academic exercise for scholars. Reclaiming these traditions is about a very real, very profound path toward liberation.
The name for this whole process is epistemic decolonization. And here is the really crucial part that the paper stresses. This is necessary for everyone. It's a way for colonized peoples to reclaim their intellectual independence, for sure. But it's also a way for people from colonizing traditions to undo the distortions and the myths of their own superiority. The end goal is a more whole, more honest worldview for everybody.
And this whole approach brings us right back to that first question. What's education for? Well, it recenters it on a much, much deeper purpose. It's not about getting a good job, it's about fulfilling our very potential as human beings. As the great scholar Al-Ghazali wrote way back in the 11th century, the pursuit of knowledge is the whole reason we were created.
Just so you know, all the ideas we've been breaking down in this explainer come directly from this source paper by Joseph Lumbard, which was published in the journal Teaching in Higher Education. It is a really powerful call for education to do so much more than just instruct. It argues it should aim for nothing less than cognitive liberation.
So that leaves us with one final, pretty powerful question to chew on. We've seen how education can be used as a tool to control and to colonize a mind. But what would it really take to build an education that was truly designed to liberate one?